Hello, and welcome to a special episode of the Mathematicians Podcast, in a sub-series called The Injectives, where the function is that I talk one-to-one with people far more qualified than myself to speak about the history of mathematics. Today, I'm being levelled up by a game designer, Mikhail, who you will almost certainly not have heard of as he keeps a private life, and in fact took me quite a lot of sleuthing to find him myself, although it is no puzzle as to why he's been invited. I was very keen for us to sit down today because Mikhail has co-created possibly my favourite game available in app form, Euclidia. Mikhail, can you please use a hint and describe to the listeners what the game Euclidia is?
Okay, hello, and it's a pleasure to join your podcast. If I had to put it very briefly, Euclidia is a collection of interactive geometry construction puzzles packaged as a game. Each puzzle is a level, and to unlock the next one, you need to solve the current one. But the key point is that these are not your typical school geometry problems. To highlight the difference, let me remind you a well-known joke about the mathematical mindset. Someone asks a mathematician how to boil water. The mathematician replies, well, you take a kettle, fill it with water, light the stove, and put the kettle on, and then wait. Now imagine you already have a kettle filled with water and a lit stove. How do you boil water? Easy, pour out the water, turn off the stove, and now we've reduced it to the previously solved problem. This lazy approach makes sense in theoretical maths or in school as well, but in Euclidia, each problem has to be solved optimally using the fewest possible moves. And that changes everything. Even a seemingly trivial school-level task can turn into a serious brain teaser due to these restrictions.
Fantastic. So it's like the painful geometry you might have learned at school, but now painful geometry you don't know as an adult, and you're trying to figure it out as you go along. It's a beautiful game, and I have been playing this game since I first became a teacher. In fact, I stumbled across it when looking for an app to help my students with their Euclidean geometry. I used to teach at the sort of school that has a pack of 30 iPads, but no one has a calculator or pair of compasses. Shout out to Stenning Grammar School. Now, sadly, compass construction is not a major theme in the modern educational system, at least in the UK. Students must learn perpendicular bisection, angle bisection, and an equilateral triangle for their GCSEs, and then there's a few constructions in the same way for complex algebra for the further maths A level. But looking beyond the current UK curriculum, could you give us an idea of how important the lessons that you teach in the game were throughout history?
Yes, it's not just the UK. In most developed countries today, school mathematics is no longer divided into distinct subjects like arithmetic, algebra, and geometry. But that was not always the case. And just about 100 years ago, geometry was a mandatory and separate subject in school curricula, and later it even branched off into its own course of trigonometry. In fact, entrance exams for technical universities used to include Euclidean geometry as a core component, and more specifically, construction problems. These problems were not chosen by accident. Solving them involved analyzing of the conditions, finding a solution which was often far from obvious and in modern terms doesn't have a straightforward algorithm. Then proving the correctness of the construction and even exploring under which conditions the construction is possible and how many solutions exist. In other words, a single well-crafted construction problem could give examiners deep insight into students' mathematical thinking. Unfortunately, the pendulum eventually swung the other way. Mathematics in schools began to be seen as too difficult for the average student, and the curriculum was gradually simplified. Basic construction problems still remain in countries where geometry is taught as a separate subject, But even there, they tend to be optional, a kind of extra topic alongside more standard calculation and proof-based problems. And one of our goals is to return the interest to the construction problems. And the evidence of that we choose the right direction is in common user reviews like we received. I hated geometry at school, but now I see that it can be fascinating.
I had no idea that compass geometry was an entrance requirement for colleges and universities. Did when you've been researching the game, did you have past papers of entrance exams in the way that we might use past papers today to help students practice?
No, but we studied different literature and problems, and I can't speak about different countries, but it was true for Russia, that is famous for its mathematical education.
That's fantastic. So in the UK, there's a big contention in teaching between whether we teach to an exam syllabus or whether we teach mathematics for its pure joy. And as you described, the pendulum has swung towards the simplistic. And a big criticism of modern education, at least in the UK and I think abroad, is that students can memorize what's needed for an exam. It sounds like if compass constructions were on the entrance exam for universities, there might end up being fewer mathematicians at university because it would be challenging. Right, speaking of the puzzles in the game, many of them are reruns of previous puzzles that appear in earlier levels, but set in reverse. So, for instance, in an early level, we might have an angle bisection, find half the angle, and then later we would be given an angle bisector and asked to find the original, so doubling the angle. Or perhaps we are inscribing a circle in a square, and then later exscribing a square about a circle. So this feels like it's following a similar pattern to maybe algebraic operators, where we have a function and an inverse function. Is this philosophy of operations being performed and inverted and compounded intentional? And would this be a common trend in ancient geometric construction?
The game is designed not just to test raw techniques, but to explore the deeper structural relationships between operations and objects. Reversing construction forces the player to think creatively and abstractly. It's not longer just about applying a known method, but about truly understanding the geometry well enough to unwind it. So yes, the game includes many pairs of puzzles that mirror each other, but this was never a goal in itself. We didn't try to include every possible reversed construction. For example, you mentioned the inscribed and circumscribed square, and yes, both are there. But in another case, we have a problem about inscribing a circle in a rhombus. Yes, there is no corresponding task about circumscribing a circle around a rectangle. Or
famously, you'll have a tripling of an angle, but I don't think that you're asking the players to trisect an angle.
We have an angle trisection in Euclidean, but as you definitely know, it is only possible for some angles, and we included just the case of 54 degrees angle, and no go through other angles where trisection is possible. So,
well, as we've discussed, it's impossible in the general case. I find it interesting that the puzzles being reversed is more of a challenge to the player to practice and understand the skills, as opposed to being a core component of ancient geometric construction, when things like finding a geometric mean would have been a more commonplace exercise to process. So are you blending together then some techniques that were standard in the ancient world, like the geometric mean or quadrature of a triangle, combining that with things just to test the player?
When choosing which puzzles to include, we always try to strike a balance between elegance, non-triviality, and well-known problems come along with less known And as for historical side, you know the history of geometry far better than I do. Broadly speaking, while Euclid's elements don't explicitly discuss inverse operations, ancient geometers certainly practiced configuring known results, often reversing or generalizing constructions. And their work was built on a strong tradition of analysis and synthesis, essentially forward and reverse reasoning. And in fact, the method of analysis used by mathematicians like Pappus involved assuming the goal had already been achieved and reasoning backward to know truth. It is very much like reverse engineering geometric construction.
That's interesting. Yeah, so I suppose it's we do it to understand rather than just just for fun, which is a difficult criticism to level at the game. The game is of course fun as well, but the goal is to understand and learn more about it. Excellent. One theme that we've been talking about in the podcast recently, with characters like Hippias and Dinostratus in particular, is the difference between the canonically approved geometric tools, so that is the compass and the straight edge, and what we might call geometric cheating. So using the quadratrix, for instance, where Dinostratus squared the circle. As someone who is intimately connected with Euclidean geometric puzzles, do you have an opinion about whether the pure method is preferable or whether a creative solution is better?
The pure method remains to be the most interesting one. These simple tools, the compass and straight edge, are versatile and highly used in different kind of problems, while tricky tools are usually applicable to a narrow set of tasks. For example, the angle bisector, despite being quite fundamental, is the least used tool in the game, and it is useful in fewer than 5% of the problems. But it's true that inventing such tools themselves was challenging and required a lot of creativity. And it was also a great engineering problem before, while nowadays creating a digital tool in the computers is quite straightforward and easier.
I do find it interesting that the pure methods are still considered more optimal, and I like your analysis that it's the trying to create a worldview with the fewest number of rules. And I suppose this is a bit like when we set up an axiomatic theory of mathematics. We like to have as fewer axioms as possible to describe as much as possible. And in a sense, the pure tools of just the straight edge and just the circle encapsulate that philosophy. Although, from what I've researched so far, it's the movement away from that into things like the spiral and into things like the conic sections that has pushed mathematics forwards into the vast beast that it is today. Whereas the pure tools of just the straight edge and compass wouldn't have allowed us to explore things like calculus in the same way. So I wonder if then there's a contention between artistic purity and practical utility with some things.
Yes, it's possible, and I agree that it could be interesting to explore such new tools that that make some new problems solvable. But there are. I think there are not so many problems to solve using a specific tool. So this can be done like a side quest or a separate app, but not, for example, in Euclid itself.
No, yes, I think you're right. So the quadratrix, for instance, we've recently discussed on the podcast how you can use it to trisect an angle, or indeed n-sect an angle, and it was used to square the circle. But beyond these parlor tricks, it doesn't seem to do as much as the straight edge and compass can do. Can we move on to talk about optimization? I'm currently stuck, and I have been for the past year or so. I'm stuck on level 11.8. So in this level, you're presented with a circle, you're given the center, and you are asked to construct a pentagon inside the circle. Now, I know how to do this. I sometimes do it with my advanced classes in school. It's a beautiful construction. The problem I have is that my method takes 16 movements. And in order to pass a level, you need to complete it in 10 movements. You mentioned the idea of movements earlier on when we started. Can you just describe what we mean by a movement, first of all?
We call them moves. So each move is an application of a single tool, and this can be a Euclidean tool, that is a compass and straight edge, that is denoted as E in the game, like Euclidean moves. And there are also any other move with complex instruments that produces more complex object and correspond to several pure Euclidean constructions. For example,
so for instance, the line of the perpendicular bisector takes 3 Euclidean movements, but only produces the one line.
Yes, and so each problem can be considered as 2 or even 3 different problems. For example, the solution that is optimal in sense of Euclidean moves can be solved completely different if you try to minimize the number of lines on the diagram.
So in terms of the academic theory then behind this process of optimization, can you give me a sense of why my solution for a pentagon is 50% worse than the optimal solution, and how these optimal solutions were found? When did they start coming in?
I completely understand your situation, and it's actually a very common one. We often include a problem based on a classical solution or on a construction that we found ourselves, but then players start finding improvements, one then another and another, and we just have to keep updating the record.
Wow, okay.
And honestly, we can only guess how they managed to some of these optimizations. Sometimes a new solution comes from a new idea. You apply your idea and engineer a new approach, and then try to reduce the number of moves in this new solution. And sometimes it happens intuitively, like you notice a pattern or regularity in the construction and use it to solve the problem, and only later you work out why it actually makes sense and how to prove it. Sometimes it is not clear at all.
I have myself stumbled across a few solutions from time to time and then pretended to understand it. Yes. So in terms of optimization, is there an idea of upper and lower bounds for the most efficient route? For instance, I could be 100% confident that you can't create a perpendicular bisector in under 3, but are we as confident that you can't make a pentagon in less than 10, or is there room for development in these constructions as well?
We cannot be sure, and this is...
So there's not a proof or an analysis of it?
Yes, you see, the brute force approach is not applicable here because the number of variants grows faster than a factorial squared, and combinatorial approach simply doesn't work. And even short 3-step problems can be hard to brute force if the solution is based on a free point. That is the point that is placed arbitrarily and can be moved, keeping the solution stable. For example, in level 2.8, you need to construct a tangent line to a circle in a given point. And the 4-move solution is simple. You construct the diameter at the given point, and from the previous levels, you know how to construct a perpendicular in the next 3 moves. So that makes 4. However, 3 moves solution exists, and it is interesting that it took 4 months to find it after the level was first appeared in the game. And even when using computers, it remained an issue, and the depth is limited to 7 or 8 moves, and
really,
yes, and deeper solutions seems to be not unreachable without some kind of optimization, which is not. It's not clear how to achieve this. So
it is comforting to hear that while in a world now where computers can routinely beat humans at chess and even at Go, in the world of compass constructions, we humans can still find better solutions than a computer.
Maybe, yes, maybe that's the point, because the complexity grows fast enough, and there is not enough good heuristics to limit the search to some special cases.
I'll give an example as well, which I'll leave as an exercise for the listener, just to think about how many different ways you can develop this combinatorial approach. If you were to draw a circle on a piece of paper, and then I give you the instruction to draw a second circle on that piece of paper, how many different ways could you draw the second circle in relation to the first circle? I've done this myself, and I can count 6 different ways of doing it, and I'll leave it as an exercise for the listener to think about how many ways they could make it look distinct. Following up on this conversation then about combinatorics and trying to map out the different progression of a construction, I'd like to talk about some notation as well. So we've looked at logic recently with Aristotle, who came out with all of these logical complications and the syllogisms. And now in the modern world, we can annotate the logical implications Aristotle was making using notation. So, for instance, the proposition that all cats are brutes could be represented as for all C, C is a subset of B. Is there a similar kind of language or notation that one can use when describing these isomorphic constructions? That is, the constructions that are the same structure without necessarily being the same size or the same orientation. Or does one simply have to draw them in order to represent it?
Yes, there is definitely a kind of geometric notation or language, if you will, that allows us to record the constructions in a way that they can be reconstructed without relying on a diagram. We describe lines drawn through given or previously constructed points. We use 3 points or points constrained to certain parts of the plane or line. So in this sense, geometry doesn't have its own symbolic system, much like logic does. However, it quickly gets complicated. For example, when a line and a circle intersect in 2 points, we have to distinguish between them somehow. And there is no universal consensus on how to notate this. Or take the case of seemingly arbitrary point. Sometimes it is not completely arbitrary, but limited by some part of a plane.
So maybe what you're hinting at then is sort of the language that we might meet in GeoGebra, which I'm sure the listeners are familiar with. I've got it up on screen at the moment. If I was to construct a perpendicular bisector between 2 points A and B, as I plot them, the language for those constructions come up on the side window. So A and B are given coordinates, which is easy enough. But then when I start to construct the perpendicular bisector, the language says C : circle A, B. Is this the kind of notation that you might be referring to with geometric constructions then?
Yes, but in this approach there is one more challenge that there can be different ways to represent the same geometry object. For instance, if point C lies on the perpendicular bisector of segment AB, then a circle centered at C passing through A is the same as the circle centered at C passing through B.
Yes.
So,
okay. Yeah, that's a problem.
So we have two circles, C from A and C from B, and we need to understand that they are actually the same or two different circles.
Yeah. Okay. That raises one of the other questions I wanted to ask you. Then is how does the code actually check the correct solution? If that's not a proprietary question that you're not allowed to answer.
Yes, so symbolic representations are possible and useful, but they are not quite as systematic and compact as the formal logic, and we can't simply pre-compute and store all possible solutions and then check if a user answers is isomorphic to one of them. So in that, we use a different approach to check whether the solution is correct. Instead of comparing exact coordinates, we slightly wiggle the initial objects, we move the given elements just a bit, and then replay the entire construction using those slightly altered inputs. If the resulting object still matches what is supposed to, the solution is accepted. So
that is very clever.
It's not a perfectly rigorous method, but it helps avoid a much worse problem, that is false negatives.
Yeah. So one of the big conceptual errors that a lot of my students and friends and family have when they play the game is that close enough is never good enough, that things have to be spot on and you need to be precise with where you draw your points from. But this would then take away the possibility of having a false negative of something that looks good, even if you zoom into the limits of the screen.
Yes, and so more precise approach would often reject the valid solutions, and there's also a problem that some of our users think that the construction is about guessing, and they complain about their fat fingers that just can provide the required accuracy. So we perform some countermeasures to avoid such guessing, and they are almost always work, but not always. So you just can play a trick and receive a false solution.
I would love to see your list of banned players who have done illegal operations. I like to give real world analogies for complex maths ideas, and I think your idea of taking the given construction as a set of notation and then modulating it slightly to check that the result still holds is a little bit like how when I do DIY at home, I build something and then give it a good old shake to make sure that it stays standing and hasn't fallen over. So it's nice to see that approach in a academic setting. So in on the context of illegal moves, I'd like to talk a little bit about constructability, and this is something we've not discussed on the podcast yet. Sometimes I doubt whether a solution is solvable at all, although so far my skepticism has been proven ill-judged every time, because sometimes I have to look the answer up. And the ancient Greeks, they knew things that they could construct as well. They knew they could construct a polygon with sides numbered 3, 4, and 5. And they also knew that they could construct any polygon with twice the number of sides as a previously constructed polygon. So a small mini question for you. How would you go from a pentagon to a decagon?
Constructing a decagon from a regular pentagon is actually quite straightforward. First, you draw a circle around the pentagon, a circumcircle. Then connect each vertex of the pentagon to the center with a straight line. The points on the circle that are directly opposite to original vertices, the diametrically opposite points give you the 5 missing vertices, and then you connect all 10 points in order, and you have a regular decagon. But that's just one method. So there are other.
Maybe we won't go into the other method because we're short on time, and I've got a lot of interesting questions I want to get to.
Mm-hmm.
But it is nice to know that a routine procedure can get you there. But if we have sides numbered 3, 4, and 5, we have all the doubles, so 6, 8, 10, 12, 16, 20. And then also we do get some later additions as well to that canon. So Euclid described the pentadecagon, a 15-sided shape in Book 4. But then it took another 2,000 years until 1796 for Gauss, the father of everything, to find the 17agon. Why did it take so much later to find another constructible shape? And how can we be certain at the moment that we have found all the constructibles and that we aren't going to eventually discover a 7-sided construction?
Yes, the story of Gauss is quite remarkable. By the late 18th century, it seems that mathematicians had developed such deep reverence for Euclid's elements that they genuinely believed that there were no significant geometry discoveries left to be made beyond what the ancient Greeks had already done. At the time, the many famous classical problems like squaring the circle, doubling the cube, and trisecting an angle were still unsolved, and the independence of Euclid's fifth postulate hadn't yet been proved.
So this is the one that says you can always draw 2 parallel lines, or you can never draw 2 parallel lines, or multiple parallel lines. Is that the fifth postulate?
Yeah. But oddly enough, the question of which regular polygons are constructible was not really seen as unfinished business. So when Gauss showed not only that the regular 17gon is constructible, but also gave a general criterion for when a regular polygon can be constructed using only compass and straightedge, it was a shock, and his result essentially opened the crack in the perceived completeness of ancient geometry. And after that, new geometric discoveries began to pour out. In many ways, Gauss laid the foundation of modern geometry, a more synthetic field that blends classical constructions with algebraic and analytic methods. And as of today, there are still many open questions in the realm of geometric constructions. One fascinating example is Wernicke's list, compiled in 1982 by William Wernicke. He explored all the ways to construct a triangle from 3 given points. This could be vertices, midpoints of sides, feet of altitudes, bisector bases, or triangle centers. Some of these problems on the list were already well known, others were solved by himself, and a few he proved to be impossible. Wernicke's publication got attention, but the final solution of the list, covering all the cases, was not completed until 2016, over 3 decades later. And if we were to expand this list by including even more types of reference points, I think that there would be a lot of surprises.
So I'm being quite small-minded when I focus on a regular polygon, and in fact, the world of open geometric questions is still alive and well, but broader than polygons inscribed in a circle.
And we know much less when unusual constraints are applied or when using other tools. That is why there are so many surprises in Euclidia, where you are limited by the number of moves. And another example is about straightedge-only constructions. It seems to be well known, but because according to Poncelet-Steiner theorem, whatever can be constructed by straightedge and compass together can be constructed by straightedge alone, provided that a single circle and its center are given. But it is not known, for example, whether it's possible to do this if 2 circles are given without their centers. So that's still an open questions. And another famous example for classic problems, a classic problem that is not solved, that is how to construct a triangle whose internal angle bisectors, I mean their length, are given.
Hello, listeners. This is Benjamin speaking from the future, back in time, interrupting this interview with some updates. After recording this, Mikhail checked his own notes and reviewed all the things that he had said and discovered that his understanding is still a little bit out of date based on when he was introduced to these problems by the authors who were investigating them. So he very helpfully checked the sources and came back to me with an update to give me some answers to the open questions that he stated. So to summarise the two open questions he's just described, in one of them, he said it was still unknown whether we can construct the centres of two given circles using only a straight edge. And it turns out that question was answered in 2017 by one of his friends, Arseny Akopayan and Roman Fedorov. The article for this I'll link in the show notes, but to summarise the two main theorems that they prove, the first theorem is that there exists two circles whose centres cannot be constructed using only a straight edge. In other words, you can do it with some circles, but not every circle. There exists some counterexamples. And the second theorem is there exists two circles lying one outside the other such that it is not possible to construct their common tangent lines using only a straight edge. Again, this is a there exists as opposed to a for all, so we might be able to do it sometimes, but you can show that it is not always possible. And again, this is just for the straight edge only construction. So if you're using a compass and a straight edge, then these results become a lot easier to show. But just for a straight edge, those two things are sadly not possible. I won't summarise the entire article for you. You can read that for yourself if you are interested. But there was one result that I wanted to share because I thought it was a really beautiful construction. So if you have one circle drawn entirely enclosed within another, so a small circle inside a big circle, and you draw a line that connects the two centres of those two circles, let's assume that those two centres are known, there's something interesting that is collinear with those two centres. So the point that is interesting is the cyclic quadrilateral that is inscribed in the larger circle but circumscribed in the smaller circle. So to summarise that, we have to start with the small circle and draw tangent lines such that the tangents of the small circle all meet at 4 points on the circumference of the larger circle. So the word they use is circum-inscribed. If you can draw this particular quadrilateral and then you connect the diagonals of that quadrilateral, the intersection of the diagonals is collinear with the two centres of the circles. Now, I'll be honest, I've not read the entire article myself yet. I've just been looking at the pictures and trying to get the key points so that I can correct the record for this interview. But that particular diagram jumped out at me as particularly beautiful. I'd highly encourage you to go and research it yourself and find out more about what's going on with this construction. So thank you very much to those two authors, Arseny Akopayan and Roman Fedorov, for their work. The other question that Mikhail alluded to was, can we construct a triangle given the lengths of the bisectors? If we know the lengths of three bisectors, can we construct the triangle? And again, this is a sadly no, not always. There are a few special cases where it is possible. So the case of the equilateral triangle and a few other cases you can do it. But in general, no, sadly, it is impossible. And again, I'll link to the proof for this one from the website cutthenot.org. I'll link the proof to this one in the show notes if you'd like to look at it in more detail. Thank you very much, Mikhail, for correcting the record and getting back to me on that one. I will now let the rest of the interview continue. The problem with you giving out a nice long list of very interesting open questions is I then get distracted and think about the first one and try to visualize what's going on. So I'm going to have to listen back to this myself later and do some more research into those. So next, I'd like to turn our attention back to the game that you created, Euclidia. Obviously, its name is Euclidia, and thus has a focus for the puzzles that are appropriate for Euclidean geometry. Did you consider widening the scope of tools and methods to include some of these other forms of constructions?
There are a lot of ideas to implement. It would be very interesting to try constructions in hyperbolic geometry in the Poincaré disk model, or to explore specific tools like the rusty compass, or another example is circular inversion that can be a very useful tool in solving problems involving many tangent circles and lines. And
let's just define those terms before you give me another one. So when we say a circular inversion, this is a little bit like a mirrored reflection line, but in the curved circle.
Yes.
Like going to the fun fair and seeing the wonky mirrors. And you also mentioned a rusty compass. Now, I was under the impression that Euclidia already includes a rusty compass, in that if you have a given length, you can draw a given circle of that length anywhere you like.
It's a bit different thing. So in the earlier books of the elements, the compass is used more primitively. One leg is placed in the center and the other at another point, and then the circle is drawn. So this compass forgets the radius after being lifted up. And that is why it is called collapsible compass. And it can be used to transfer length. And that kind of compass is implemented in Euclidia. And rusty compass is a bit different case. This is the compass whose radius is fixed forever, and it can only produce circles of the same radius. So it doesn't extend your possibilities, but rather limits them.
Right. So the one that you have in the game, you can translate a circle, but you could also then draw a different circle of a different radius. Whereas a rusty compass might be a bit more like drawing around the bottom of your mug. You only get that one radius forever.
Yes, and there are, we know a series of interesting problems for this specific tool, and they can be included in the game as a side quest.
Okay. The other misconception that a lot of people have when doing compass constructions, especially I find this for my 13-year-old students at school, is they don't really know what a straight edge means, mainly because the only straight edge they have is their ruler, or more commonly their bus bars. But when we talk about a compass construction with a straight edge, this should be an unmarked straight line. And therefore, there is no real sense of length or magnitude apart from one circle being bigger or smaller than another circle. In terms of the possibilities for more constructions, I won't ask you to talk about all of the possible ways that one can construct, but are you able to mention the difference then between a straight edge and a marked ruler?
Yes, sure. There is such a difference, and using just straight edge looks more natural, because even we have these advanced compasses that can be used to transfer distances. Such solutions became harder to understand, because this, in some sense, it breaks the whole construction by this transferring, and it's easier to track the relationship between the objects. So for the game, this traditional geometric straight edge look much preferable.
Okay, all right. So a spoiler alert then for future people doing their own research into the Neusis construction of Archimedes, I believe, where more possibilities present themselves if you are allowed to mark your ruler. But they are just different rules and different versions of purity. But we like to stick with the pure unmarked ruler and the collapsible compass that doesn't remember its length. Fantastic. So in Euclid's time, the elements that he wrote, this would have been considered a textbook. So something that students would read to learn about the basics of maths. It was not considered a revolutionary text for the time, not even particularly advanced. It was just summarising the work so far. Now, you've taken the propositions that he was writing about, and others, and gamified it to facilitate and support learning. Many would suggest that this problem solving is a more modern style of learning, away from the rote memorization. But could you point to a time in history when solving puzzles became increasingly important for learning rather than just memorizing the propositions?
The shift toward learning through problem solving rather than memorization was a gradual process. One can recall mathematics of the Islamic Golden Age, particularly between the 8th and 12th centuries. Mathematicians like Al-Khwarizmi and later Amar Khayyam were not only translated Greek works, but also expanding them, often using problems. Or we can recall the Pons synonym. It is the theorem that the angles opposite to the equal sides of an isosceles triangle are themselves equal. Even in the Middle Ages, this problem was considered as a test of critical thinking and reasoning. One more important point on this way is the appearance of dynamic geometry programs, which significantly extended our possibilities and made geometry wider available. And on top of them is gamification, which is realized by Euclidia.
Do you think the recreational maths, if you like, is a modern trend then that has spawned as games themselves became more common, or do we see in history people doing maths simply for the joy of it and solving puzzles for fun? Did they have ancient Sudoku?
Yes, there were a lot of such people, but not so many because it was not so much free time to think and to solve such useless in practical sense problems. But famous mathematicians like Fermat used letters to discuss such interesting problems with others. So it has some roots in the past.
Fair enough. One period of history I'm particularly excited to get to is the mathematical duels of I think the Renaissance era, where mathematicians would send problems to each other to fight for dominance and supremacy within their communities. So maybe we'll get a sense of this when we come to that period of history. In terms of solving puzzles and problems, or even games, is there something that has stood out to you as memorable for your own learning journey, maybe at school or maybe since?
I can tell you about my journey to geometry instead. I first encountered geometry when I was 10. My mother said that I would have geometry classes next year, and since it would be hard enough, she proposed to prepare in advance. So we took a textbook and began reading it and solving problems together. Before long, she announced that it had become too difficult for her, even though she was a trained engineer. And this was a trick, but this trick worked perfectly. I felt myself very clever and started explaining the topics to her and continued solving everything on my own. And next year, I was brilliant on geometry lessons, and this encouraged me even more. And this was possible because geometry is both strict and logical on one hand, and creative and artistic on the other. So logic and intuition can work together, each supporting the other. I was completely fascinated by geometry and fell in love with it. And then I went study mathematics at university. Later, I decided to become a programmer, but after many years, those two passions, mathematics and programming, came together, and that's why I now create mathematical games and apps.
Fantastic. Well, one thing that always intrigues me is how lots of people can call themselves a mathematician, and to them individually, that sometimes means a different thing. So when I think about maths, when I think about my own studies of maths, I am more of an applied theoretical physicist. My specialty is in fluid dynamics. And when I talk to people about statistics or advanced algebra or today about geometry, I feel a little bit like a tourist because I don't have much more knowledge of geometry beyond what I've researched for the podcast and what I learned at A level, so in school. So it's fascinating then to talk to you coming from very much a geometry grounding and going through university with that as your focus. Did you also study the other branches of mathematics like fluid dynamics and abstract algebra?
Yes, actually, I have a diploma in abstract algebra.
Fantastic. I don't even know what that means. But that's great.
And when we created Euclidia, we thought that it would be interesting for some mathematicians and people who involved in mathematics already, maybe pupils that study geometry at school, but in reality, a lot of other people are involved and like our game because it's like a puzzle, not like a boring geometry course in school.
I've made
So
your
that was a
game.
great surprise.
I've made your game mandatory homework for about 300 students now in my career so far. So it's definitely good for all ages and all levels. I wonder then if a future development could be a gamification of a different area of mathematics. Maybe one day we'll see the fluid dynamics problem solving puzzle game or something with statistics. But back to the game. Is there a particular level that you are most proud of, or a construction that you think is the most beautiful? Maybe you could describe the problem to the listeners, and then we'll leave them to find the solution themselves.
We have a famous problem 1.7, where you need to describe a square into a circle in 7 moves given one of the vertices. Since the side of the squares take themselves 4 moves, it looks impossible to achieve something useful in just 3 first moves. That's why we received tons of feedback, mostly negative. A lot of players blamed us, insisted that we added this impossible restriction to force everybody to pay for unlocking next levels. One guy promised to eat his own iPad if the solution exists. I gave him some hints. The problem was finally solved, and he asked me to keep his iPad because otherwise he would not be able to use Euclidia further. And another example related to
I
this
think teachers everywhere
problem.
will relate to that idea of unruly students. Yes.
We received an email from an architect who used Euclidia to master his vision and comprehension of the scene and to track relationships between geometric objects. And he confessed that it took him a while to solve 1.7 because he didn't expect such unbalanced construction. Another player wrote that he finally solved it after 2 years of periodical attempts. This is because the solution, it seems, can be found using your knowledge, your background in geometry, but either intuition or some kind of brute force. So I can reveal the possible logic here. There are hints in the game, and you can learn from them that the sequence of tools for this level is 2 circles and then 5 lines. We can assume that the last 4 moves are the sides of the square. So after the first 3 moves, we most probably need to get 2 points on the side of the square to be able to construct it. So the first move is the only possible if we assume that there are no free points in the solution. Due to symmetry, we have 2 variants of the second move. There are either a circle of the same radius or a circle with twice radius. So the key step of the solution is the third move. It is a line, and we have 10 variants for it. and we can draw all of them and try to look for the required intersections. And it is easier to do this in the explore mode, where the target square is displayed.
So this method of just trying all the options, it works well when you're drawing the square in the circle. I've personally been attempting a similar technique to do the pentagon in the circle, and it definitely, even just without one extra line, it gets significantly more complex to use that trial and error method. I think you mentioned that there were 10 possible options for drawing your first of the lines. It explodes quickly, doesn't it?
Yes, and I think the pentagon can be constructed by pure intuition. You need some knowledge of golden section and how and the ways how to obtain this.
Admittedly, this is my failing, because whenever I succeed at a level, I pat myself on the back and move on, and I don't go back to think deeply about how I got there and what I can learn from that to apply to the next construction. So I admit that's my failing, although I have been trying to do it on paper at the same time with algebra and Pythagoras' theorem and getting the square root of 5 and the rest of it as well. It is a tough problem. I'm intrigued though that your favorite solution, your favorite problem of all of the the library is one that's available as soon as you download the game in 1.7. For people who are yet to download the game, in order to get to the next batch of questions, you have to have fully answered all of the solutions and get a significant number of the stars for doing it efficiently before you can move on. So it's intriguing that there is such a difficult problem just in that first batch.
It was done intentionally to make it simple. It looks very simple. Everybody can understand what you need to get, unlike like Pentagon. But the trick is that you need to find some unusual solution. But we don't like to share ready solutions, but we can provide some hints, and I'm sure that everybody can solve this problem.
One of my favorite aspects of the game actually is in the hint mechanism. You have the tools and the steps needed, just not precisely. The bit I like though is where you have the method revealed to give you a clue as to what a broader strategy to use, whether it's symmetry or similar triangles or a circle theorem. So that's very nice as a teaching tool. I like that. Are there any levels that didn't make the final cut that you have still in your notepad that are yet to be turned into a level of the game? Maybe something that was just too difficult or otherwise?
When the emphasis shifts to the sporting side of the game, this is minimizing the number of moves. Many puzzles took an unexpected turn. Solvers found shorter solutions that completely lost the elegance we originally intended, while the level of difficulty skyrocketed. One clear example was a problem about the midline of a trapezoid. Our intended solution was simple: construct the height, a perpendicular from a vertex to the base, then construct the perpendicular bisector of that segment. That makes
so this is
6 moves.
This is the arithmetic mean of two sides of a trapezium.
Yes, but players found a much shorter and much less intuitive method, and it also depends on the configuration of this trapezoid, and the solution was not universal. So at the end, we removed that problem from the app entirely and replaced it with the midline of a triangle. And this is the main reason why a level can be not included in the game, but otherwise we would gladly to add any problem.
Is there a problem that you happen to know which has the largest number of constructions needed? I dread to think how much Gauss's 17 gon would take.
One of the last levels has such a record that was, I think, 15 or 16 moves at the beginning, and we assumed that it was way too difficult, and we didn't see any ways to optimize this solution. But after some time, our users found a shorter solution and then a shorter, and now it is just 10 moves.
Wow.
So
You potentially have enough information with this game to write your own academic papers on optimization just from your user base.
yes, that's true. And even, for example, even this optimal solution can have different representations and can be from different ideas. For example, for pentagon construction, there are, I think, 4 different constructions that we know that are not isomorphic, and it's also interesting to enumerate them all.
Yeah, I mean, so I only know one of them, obviously, but I've been struggling to find the other ones as well because I don't like being stuck. I like to learn more, so I've been googling around, and without going on the fandom wiki that will give you a direct walkthrough, it's really hard to find a published construction in a normal resource that doesn't relate to the game that will walk you through it. And there must be then people who are playing your game who have genuinely discovered a new thing in mathematics that is not published anywhere other than in the log files of your game. And maybe they will just be anonymous heroes for the rest of time. Do you have a percentage figure of how many people have ever completed it?
Not exactly, just roughly, because we don't have all the statistic and don't track the progress of
Fair
individual players. So less than 1% of users can complete the game, maybe not optimally, but to solve
If you
all the levels.
if you ever make an infographic of what percentile of players you are in by reaching any level, I'd quite like to see that graph. I'd like to know how I'm ranking against the world players. But you're right, it would be perhaps inappropriate to track user data. It's a very personal thing to know how good you are at constructions. One question that I'd quite like to ask all of my guests. I'm looking through all of the mathematicians in history in the European tradition in chronological order. Is there a mathematician who you are most looking forward to being featured? Someone who is your personal hero of maths?
I would definitely choose Carl Friedrich Gauss because his work spans in so many areas of mathematics. And what fascinates me most in the context of geometry that he bridged classical geometry and modern algebra. And I can say that I worked in both fields, in modern algebra as a student and in classical geometry from my childhood and now.
Very good. I'm also really looking forward to Gauss, and also wildly intimidated because I think it's going to take at least 10 episodes just to do Gauss. He did, after all, invent everything. So, as we draw this episode to a close, let me give you one clear instruction. Go and download the game if you haven't downloaded it already. Or, of course, you can play it online in browser at www.euclidia.xyz. The link will be in the show notes. Go and give it a high rating and support Mikhail's work. It is completely free, although if you do want to support his work, then there is a paid version with additional hints and graphics, although of course these are not necessary to enjoy and to learn. He told me that before recording that if I can get just 1 million of you to buy the full version, then he would be able to hire a whole team of 100 interns to work on more sequels and more content, which the world desperately needs. Until then, make sure you subscribe to the Mathematicians podcast so that you don't miss out on any future expert interviews or indeed our regularly scheduled show, which will return next week with episode 23 when we go the distance with Aristarchus of Samos. It would be a sizable mistake not to subscribe. Until then, goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
The music today is Danse Macabre Finale by Kevin MacLeod. You can find more information in the show notes.